I'm curious about like your experience with vulnerability. I asked that question because I think a lot of times, when it comes to vulnerability, like there's oftentimes a fear of being vulnerable, of showing up as yourselves. So I'm curious about like, what is your relationship and experience like with vulnerability?
I'm very reluctant to be vulnerable because I'm very conscious of the people I'm speaking to and their role in my life. So I want to be vulnerable to someone who I know is going to reciprocate kind of what I need in that moment or what I want in that moment, whether it's support verbally, physically, I'm not sure, but in a lot of cases when I have been vulnerable, I haven't had a return on my investment, but I have appreciated it because it's a step towards, being vulnerable and comfortable, and it's not really a loss for myself. And that's what I had to realize recently, that it's okay to kind of share certain things, even if I don't get the response I want. Because ultimately, I'm kind of shedding layers and kind of that burden that existed with all of everything that I was holding in. So I've kind of learned to appreciate vulnerability more.
Yeah, definitely going off of you, I'm definitely reserved when I meet people, but I find it very essential to have open and honest conversations with people. And I understand, like, sometimes I'd be like, oh, how are you? And when people are like, I'm fine, and you can tell they're not fine, I'm like, oh, geez, why are you lying to me? Like, I know you're not fine. But then I think about it and I'm like, well, would I actually tell them how I'm feeling? You know what I mean? So I think it's important to be honest with yourself in that situation and just release that stress or the energy that you're feeling, but you don't have to go too deep into the conversation if you don't want to. But I think vulnerability is definitely like what you're saying. People are scared to talk about it because sometimes you might say something to someone and be like, oh man, I overshared, like I shouldn't have said all that. But I think it does help because in the end, even if you feel like you might have overshared, you got all of that off of your chest. And personally for me, I feel so much better after I speak what I have to say.
I feel like I'm the same as you guys. I just find myself like not sharing a lot, especially about things that are like hard hitting or important to me. Like it's very easy for me to like kind of talk to someone and talk about school, talk about like like silly things. But like when it actually comes down to it, I find like even like with my friends, like someone will be like, oh, like like what's going on with that, and you'll be like, oh, it is what it is. Is it what it like? What I mean? Like you just say things and you don't get into it. And I just feel like it's very difficult sometimes, as you said, like you feel like maybe I'm oversharing, like somebody's gonna look at me different, or they're gonna think, that, just doing too much.
I think everything that you all shared in terms of like the things that you've experienced is speaking to many versions of myself. Like certainly having the feeling, well, it's like if I share, are you gonna share? Like sort of using my vulnerability as like a transactional token. It's like I'll put mine on the table, you put yours. If you don't, then it doesn't exist. But what I've come to find out is that my vulnerability is entirely about me and for me. And I think that revelation has been incredibly liberating because I've been able to show up more authentic. And I keep mentioning Girlfriends because, again, it's my favorite show. But there is a character in it, in one of the seasons, she experienced, a loss. And one of the things that she talked about, because her husband is like, why can't you be vulnerable with me? And she's like, well, if I'm vulnerable, I lose. I'm a Black woman. I need to be strong for you. I need to be strong for my family. I need to be strong for everybody out there. And I was like, wow, like I felt that. Like it was just like how incredibly limiting because it was impacting her in such a deep way, but it's something that I resonate with. And I think, when it comes to like the superwoman syndrome or being the strong Black woman, the idea is that you need to be strong because if you're vulnerable, that means you're weak. And if you're weak, you lose, right? So there's a great risk to that vulnerability as opposed to the great liberation that can happen because of that vulnerability.